All right, let's look at what we're voting on exactly. Let's look at the proposed new chapter that they want to put into the Constitution, first of all. I remember Albo saying this was a small, minimal kind of change. We're just an entire new chapter in your Constitution, ladies and gentlemen. Let's have a look at the start of the new Chapter 9, the wording. It says, Chapter 9, Recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Peoples, 129, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. In recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia, there shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. I think a lot of people have glossed over the first line, that in recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia. That's the first time that's appeared in the Constitution, correct?
Yes, there was a proposal by John Howard at the time of the referendum that we have a acknowledgement in the preamble, and he wrote it with Les Murray. I think Les Murray did more of the writing than John Howard, and for people who aren't across Australian poets, Les died recently, but he's been the most notable Australian poet for a generation or two. So it was brought up then, but that went down decisively, actually, more decisively than the Republic went down.
I don't think we've had a big conversation about whether we actually accept as a nation, because this is a bit of a United Nations concept, this First Nations peoples thing. And I mean, I don't want to, perhaps reopen old wounds in a sense, but there is a possibility that you could make a case that this whole First Nations people idea is something that's just sort of been inserted into the Western world.
Well, so it says First Peoples, to be fair to it. The First Nations idea, that comes, I think, from North America, where you did have substantial North American Indian, we used to call them tribes, and they called them nations. So you had the Sioux Nation, which was a collection, I think, of 6 different tribal groups.
Right.
And I think we've sort of imported that holus bolus, but it's meant to give the idea that these were more substantial organisations than they were. When you talk to Aborigines, they use the term mob, and they talk about the mob down the road.
Right.
So, you get the Jagera, who are, and Turrbal, who are the Aborigines who were in the Brisbane area, but they were sort of a loose language grouping more than anything else, I suspect, with these different mobs amongst them. And there's arguments all the time. For example, move a bit further south, Mount Warning. There's 2 or 3 groups of Aborigines claim they're the custodians of that mountain. And some of them say, no, it's actually not that mountain, it's this mountain over here.
Right.
So the idea of a nation sort of regularises that and makes it seem grander than it really is.
Certainly not a nation in the sense of how we would think of it today, a nation state or something like that. But I'll just say this language is already leading to all sorts of racism, which we've been on the receiving end of. We've a prominent Aboriginal elder, who I won't name, when they saw that the Australian Jewish Association was against the voice, they said, go back to Jerusalem with your religious views or something like that. So we're already being told, go back where you come from. I mean, ignoring the fact that, most of us are born here, but that's where this sort of language can lead to.
Yeah, it is. That's why people are saying this is so divisive. Once you start talking about race and putting race into your constitution, you are cementing this principle that there is a difference between Indigenous Australians as defined here and everybody else. And that's a serious distinction.
Well, it will give them superior rights. So what your listeners viewers have got to understand is that the chapters in the Constitution organise the really important elements. So the House of Representatives gets a chapter, the Senate gets a chapter, the Judiciary gets a chapter, the states get a chapter. The Voice gets a chapter.
Right.
So if you're a judge sitting there looking at this, you're not going to say this is like the only other committee that's mentioned in the Constitution, which is the Interstate Committee, which was there to make sure the states got rid of their individual duties and so on, and that trade was absolutely fair, and then fell into disuse because there was nothing for it to do. This is something that's up there with the judiciary, with the Houses of Parliament, and you're going to say, well, it's obviously got an important job to do, or it wouldn't have been given a chapter all of its own.
It's not important, Graham. It's just a small thing. Okay. There shall be a body
Sorry,
to be
Anthony.
called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Okay, next part of the chapter, number 2, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice may make representations to the Parliament and the executive government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Now, it may make representations to the Parliament. That's locking in its right to make those representations formally and to have them by implication recognised formally, correct?
Yeah.
So it puts a bit of weight on the Parliament and the executive government of the Commonwealth.
I mean, the executives are worried because that's very broad. You know, who knows? You know, will police have to consider it? Will the Reserve Bank have to consider it when they're raising interest rates? You know, it's endless how far it could go.
Right. And it's these legal interpretations, right, that are the concern. I mean, we're going to get into this with the constitutional expert, Professor James Allen, next week on the show. But just from your legal knowledge, Robert, I mean, that's open to pretty broad interpretation.
Well, I'll tell you, if you put something before the High Court, you have no idea how it's going to go. So
Right.
you don't know how wide it can go. It's a risk. It's a real risk. Yeah.
Okay. And matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, I've heard people argue that all legislation affects Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, does it not?
Yeah, well, normally you'd say if it's just them, you'd say directly relating. Normal English, you'd say directly relating.
Right.
If you say relating, then the direct isn't there, and basically anything could potentially be part of that. Now, the government will argue, as your second part there says, that, we can tell them what they're to address. Well, good luck with that, because why have a voice if you're then going to direct them as to what they may speak on?
Yeah. It's that circular argument we were talking about before.
It's that circular argument, and there's plenty of respectable legal opinion that anything relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders could be quite a broad category. You know, it could be even interest rates. Certainly a lot of mining would certainly be related to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples because it happens in their areas. This is about
foreign policy mentioned that we should have a more Indigenous-oriented foreign policy.
Yep.
So it's,
Yep. They specifically mention in the Uluru Statement to Closing the Gap. Well, that's all about health and wealth and education and longevity and so on. So, you know, if that's what they've got in mind, it encompasses just about everything.
Section 3 here, the Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers and procedures. That essentially is just saying that this is, the Parliament will decide how the voice is going to be set up. Does that mean that we don't need to worry that it could be changed by any government in terms of its structure and its powers?
I think that's even more of a worry. I mean, who knows what future government could come in and which, once it's been approved, in what even worse way they could change it. You know, we could agree to one thing and they could make it much worse.
Right.
I think it means you should be very worried on the basis that the government could put that legislation into Parliament now on the basis of we're introducing it, we'll only obviously take it through if the referendum gets carried. That would answer the question that people have got about detail. They won't do it. Why not? What is it that they want to put in there that they don't want you to know about?
So you're saying they could have put the proposed
there's absolutely
voice.
Nothing to stop them having a bill circulated for discussion.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the things about the whole process is the lack of discussion with anyone apart from Aborigines on the Uluru Statement from the Heart and this proposal.
Yeah.
If you think about the constitutional referendum for the Republic, we had a convention. We elected people to go to the convention
And discuss it on that.
It was widely ventilated. Whereas with this, we're told, look, this is a kind gesture. You should just accept it. Which kind of reminds me of those Godfather movies where, puts his hand on your shoulder. Sol, this is a kind gesture. I think you should take it.
Yeah,
it's hard
the offer you can't refuse. Yeah. I do want to just look at the question itself that we're going to be voting on on the 14th or before, if we're pre-polling. The question itself says, a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve of this proposed alteration? Could it be any less specific if it tried?
Well, that's what they're going for.
Yeah. It's ultimate vagueness, right?
Well, they could have left off the bit about by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, I suppose. But their problem is that polling says that somewhere around 90% of people would accept the first half of that proposition to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia. Probably as long as it's put in the preamble, not in the Constitution.
In the body of the Constitution.
It's the second part where the problem is, because there is just no demonstrated need for it. And it also, divides us into two groups of people. Those who have this ability to make this representation through a body which is on a par with the Houses of Parliament, etc. And the rest of us who can just make our representations however we find best, but certainly not from that height.
I would have accepted that and supported that first line maybe 6 months ago, but not so much now. Not now knowing what I know. And I think this is where a lot of campaign groups, particularly on the left, they tend to think that if they keep pushing the envelope to the extreme, they're going to move the needle in their direction, right? Of public opinion, right? It's not always the case. You push too hard sometimes, you get a spring back. And maybe, because this has brought a lot of things to light, like how much we're spending on Indigenous, that there could be quite a backlash. Do you think from this?
I think that's one of the unfortunate consequences, that the Indigenous community that really needed a lot of extra help, now they're getting a lot of backlash. People are starting to question, why are we saying this, welcome to country so many times a day at every single thing? People are really questioning, it's gone a bit overboard in the past. And I think that's an unintended consequence that the left certainly didn't expect when they proposed this voice.
Yeah. It's important to be careful, I think, sometimes just how much you do push.
I think the Prime Minister has just been completely reckless and cavalier the way he's done this.
Yeah, I think
he hasn't attempted to prosecute a case. He hasn't attempted to consult. He's been slippery and tricky, all the way along. Just simple questions like one side only was going to get tax deductibility, for example. The way the Electoral Commission has dealt with it, et cetera, et cetera.
Ticks and not crosses,
Yeah, and this is, race relations are a delicate matter.
Yeah.
And he's treated us all with contempt, and he's floated up, and I suspect he doesn't really care too much which way it goes. If it goes down, then he'll have a permanently embittered constituency who'll cleave onto him even more strongly, and if it gets up, he's had a win.